Well, JasmineCrockett is at it again. Let's take a listen to her reasoning why the 35 years that Carmelo Anthony had been sentenced is wrong.
And Carmelo ended up stabbing, puncturing, I don't know what this tool was that they talk about, knife, or some refer to it as a tool. He ended up hitting Austin one time, and it was about where he hit him. One time, 2 inches. This wasn't someone who said, hey, let me stab you 5, 6, 7 times. And so when you're looking at the punishment range, there's a reason in Texas that it goes from 5 to 99 or life, because you are looking at how intentional,
So she's basing the sentencing off of how intentional was it to take a knife and where it landed. Now, the prosecutor, they were able to successfully prove that Anthony acted knowingly and intentionally, that the jury convicted him on first-degree murder rather than a lesser charge of manslaughter. The state even allowed him to consider a sudden passion provision, which could have lowered his sentencing bracket to a maximum of 20 years if they believed that he acted out unconditional fear, like knee-jerk reaction, a quick movement. But the jury rejected that, decided that 35 years was the just punishment for taking the life under those deliberate circumstances. Now, the point about this angle and deliberate placement of the knife was a very central piece of forensic evidence, and that is what prosecutors relied on in this case. Testified that the single stab wound directly pierced Metcalf's heart. They described it as a large, gaping, and completely unsurvivable injury. Now, this matters massively in a case like this. You've got human ribs, the sternum, the body cavity that protects the heart. Slipping a knife between the ribs or driving it straight into the chest cavity requires a specific trajectory, significant force, and a firm grip. Now, let's reflect on intent. Medical examiners can actually differentiate a wild slash from a targeted plunge, a direct strike to the center of a chest, paired with Anthony's verbal engaging that he was going to do it. That strongly indicates to the jury that he was aiming for a vital organ to cause maximum lethal harm. Now, this medical examiner's testimony about this single chest wound provided the physical proof that backed up the intent behind his word. This target, it was plunged straight into the center of Metcalf's chest. The force driving that knife into his chest cavity requires that physical resistance of the skin, dense chest muscles, and potentially bone or cartilage. Reality that the forensic team medical examiner stated it was deep, lethal wound shattered the defense's argument that it was a wild accidental poke or a minor defensive flick. Now, this was a key point also that played into this. Prosecutors demonstrated to the jury how quickly Anthony's folding pocket knife could be opened. This proved that deploying the blade required a deliberate, multi-step physical motion, reaching into the bag, pulling out the knife, opening the blade, and plunging it forward. Under Texas law, Crockett, the state does not have to prove a defendant mathematically planned the exact trajectory to pierce the heart. The prosecution only needs to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant intended to cause serious bodily injury or death. By showing this jury that Anthony warned he would use violence, he deliberately readied a lethal blade and then forcibly drove it directly into the victim's chest. The state established that intentional murder. And the jury agreed, taking less than 3 hours to reject his self-defense claim, and that's where they got the sentence of 35 years. Texas law states that you cannot bring a deadly weapon to a non-lethal fistfight or shove. When Metcalf put his hands on Anthony to move him out of the tent, Anthony immediately responded by pulling out that knife. The jury viewed a lethal blade against a physical push as an excessive and unlawful escalation. That's where she's getting this one stab wound to convict someone of a serious crime like murder or aggravated assault. They argue it as being sudden, panicked reaction, an accident during a struggle, or reckless action without an explicit intent to unalive. The 5 stab wound. That is almost always interpreted as a jury as clear as evidence of knowing an intentional act to commit that murder. Here are the limitations of self-defense. Under the Texas Penal Code Section 931, you can only use force that is immediately necessary and proportionally to protect yourself. The stop the threat rule, the law allows you to use force only until the threat is neutralized. If you stab someone once and they drop to the ground and stop fighting or run away, their threat has ended. If you continue to stab them 4 or more times, that's where they get the 5 stab wounds, where they're incapacitated, you have crossed the line from self-defense to becoming the aggressor. Even though he was stabbed once, and you, Crockett, are trying to say it was a knee-jerk reaction, a panic, that he had uncontrollable fear. Many are stating a stand your ground. You can't, because you provoked the fight or this entire argument. You must have a legal right to be in that location where the force is used. In this case, he was asked to leave a space where he did not belong, and that damaged his entire self-defense case. Now, when Anthony goes to appeal this murder conviction involving this knife, the appellate court will not do a redo trial. They look at evidentiary sufficiency to see if any rational jury could have found intent based on the forensic facts. Wound depth and force. Look at the depth and the track of the wound. That's why Crockett is pushing this defense theory. If a knife deeply through the dense muscle or cartilage, appeals courts accept this as evidence of a strong, intentional force rather than an accidental poke. Direct strikes to vital zones become the anatomical target. Neck, chest, torso. These are usually upheld by Texas appeals courts as legally sufficient evidence of an intent to kill, because a person is presumed to be intend the neutral consequences of their physical action. Review the type of knife used. A lot of people are saying, well, this was just the simple knife. When Crockett's talking about a survival knife, they'll review them. The opening and the folding of the pocket knife requires a distinct physical step, and the courts will view this as a conscious decision to deploy deadly force. This, honestly, I believe this will be their appeals process. This will be what they will literally fight it on. But Anthony, you had ample time to just get up and walk away. You had ample time instead of giving out a threat. You'll see what I can do, or I'm going to do it. Those actions, you literally had to take your hand, pick it up, open it up, and forcibly do what you did. And usually you'd have to have an immense amount of anger to build up to that. You could have just walked away. You could have just walked away. Your life would have been spared, and Austin would still be here today. Country Crazy out.